Welcome to today's live webinar entitled The Evolution of Email Marketing. Today's program is sponsored and presented to you by 3Deep Marketing. The CEO of 3Deep Marketing, Dave Woodbeck, takes pride in starting a marketing consulting company that included both strategy and technology before either were cool. He leads the charge with an insane interest in the wildly variable yet strangely predictable psychology of why people buy, backed by a fascination and knack for measurement systems that guide the needle in digital marketing. At this time, I would like to turn the call over to your host, CEO Dave Woodbeck. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, and welcome everybody to this Wednesday presentation of the evolution of email marketing. We have a pretty full agenda of things to discuss with you today. It's a beautiful day here in St. Paul, so we're anxious to get started, and let's go ahead and jump right in. Thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Dave Woodbeck. I'm the President and CEO of 3Deep Marketing. One of the unique things about our organizations, or perhaps myself, is that I'm actually a recovering CPA, which for those that don't know what that means, it stands for Certified Pain in the Rear End, as we say. But kind of a unique background coming up through a financial and CPA orientation has really led me to focus on marketing from the standpoint of how to measure its outcomes. And at 3Deep, we are a very business performance-oriented organization. We're very focused on driving business performance through digital marketing programs. And you can see here a little bit about some of the things that we do. And I'm personally active in a lot of accounts and still work a lot specifically in the email marketing arena, as well as the various technology and strategy arenas that were part of the introduction. So today we're going to talk a lot about the evolution of email marketing, and we use the word evolution very specifically. There are at times revolutionary things that happen, but oftentimes they are very disruptive and they can be a little bit dangerous. So we really want to talk about today email marketing in an evolutionary way and the way that things evolve through time. And you see the evolution of things happen all of the time. It happens in all sorts of industries that we're all familiar with, from transportation to the amazing, almost revolutionary transformations that we've seen in photography, to the ways that music has advanced. I will date myself here a little bit at times, but I was around when CDs were becoming popular, and I thought, how could it ever get better than CDs? And here we are, able to walk around with a digital library in our pocket that far exceeds anything that we would have ever imagined at the time. To the invention of this little computer in our pocket, I can't recall the last time I've seen a phone booth and gone up to a phone booth and used it, when we have these amazing little computers in our pockets that allow us to accomplish a lot of things. Email is really no different. Email is really a fascinating topic, and it's one of the, in fact, it probably is the first killer app on the internet. The first killer app on the internet that actually started way before even America Online was the vehicle where people started to look at email. I remember, again, dating myself here a little bit, I worked for Target stores, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. They're on almost everywhere you go in the United States these days. But we actually started email with green screen terminals in which we started to communicate internally. And so you can see that email continues to evolve just like everything else. And will continue to evolve. And we'll look at a couple of things here in just a moment that helps us to understand that a little bit. But even from the messages now starting to be as close to you as your watch is an example of how that evolution will continue to occur. So it seems like we can't do a presentation about email without talking about why email is still an important vehicle. It seems, again, that we can't do presentations without talking about the death of email, and especially through the last 5 years, as various channels have popped up so rapidly, each one has seemed to be the demise of email, from instant messaging to the latest, which is things around instant messaging through the phones and things like that. But it never really goes away and dies. And in fact, what we're actually starting to see is a renaissance of email that's going to make it even more effective and more useful as we go along. In the next 10 years, and perhaps what we've seen in the previous invention of email and its commercial use. So we think email is far from dead. A lot of the metrics support this. Again, when you read charts like this from various organizations, in this case marketing charts, there almost seems to be an exasperation of, yeah, wow, email is still the most effective tactic and one of the easier tactics that people can deploy, as if they're expecting it to go away someday. But it just keeps plugging along, and it's a really solid workhorse that we want to help you understand how you can start to evolve it and make it a better vehicle for you. It's certainly cost-effective. Again, study after study continues to show that it drives really strong ROI. It has the ability to reach your customers. And here's an important thing that we don't talk about enough. The customers that have been willing to sign up and hear from you are highly likely to be your best customers. Right? You can have bigger reach through other vehicles like display media, et cetera, that's going to reach a broader audience, but there's no doubt that the people that sign up for your emails, they tend to be the people that are most interested in you, and you have a great opportunity to build that customer base and really nurture repeat business, which is really the third point here. Again, a very strong mechanism for email. I love these charts from Gartner. These are what they call their hype charts. They give you a little bit of sense of all these landscape of tactics that constantly bombard us as marketers. What are the realities of those tactics? And this first one was from 2014. And I love the way that they describe this curve from innovation to the peak of inflated expectations through this is the one I like the best, the trough of disillusionment. And finally, you go up the slope of engagement and the plateau of productivity. And they placed email, this is in 2014, they placed email way up there in that plateau of productivity, which means it's certainly a very mature topic, but one that can continually evolve and where there's lots of places to get better inside of email, many of which we'll discuss today. So in the 2015 hype cycle for digital marketing, email doesn't even make the chart here in this case, partially because I think people are starting to describe email in different ways. So the arrows that I put on here actually help point us to parts of email that are evolving, that are becoming more important, that people are trying to understand better, some of which we'll talk about today in terms of personalization, in terms of how to use behavioral triggers in order to drive really valuable communication. So this gives you a good sense of the different tactics and where those are. The other thing I always like to look at with people is to really understand where are they at in their own email marketing maturity. So this is another great organization that we pay a lot of attention to here at 3Deep called Smart Insights. And it's a great chart to really understand where do you fit in this maturity curve. And the interesting thing here is what we have found is that for email having been around for such a long time, we actually find most companies are still in that initial and managed stage of email marketing excellence, and they're starting to reach for that defined stage. And in today's conversation about evolution, we're going to talk about some things in that defined maturity stage, a little bit in that quantified maturity stage, that are the things that you can start reaching for. And again, I find that these maturity models are extremely helpful in your planning. It's very hard to make quantum leaps across entire sections of maturity, to go from initial to quantified. That's very hard to do. You can do it for various elements, but getting all the way there is extremely hard. So it just helps to set your expectations and kind of lay out a roadmap for yourself that allows you to grow into these things. And again, we use the word evolve on purpose because we think in a purposeful way you can start to climb these maturity curves and really get better at your email marketing. So here's 5 strategies that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to, inside of each one of those, we'll talk a little bit about how they continue to progress. You have to have acquisition in your email programs in order to drive additional growth in your database. Personalization is a buzzword topic that we'll try to break down a little bit. We'll look at personalization through the lens of journey mapping and make sure that we can understand how to use journey mapping to better create personalized experiences. And then I'm going to share with you I think an interesting way to talk about value from your email that's maybe a little bit different than what you've heard in the past or in ways that you've prepared it before. So I'm kind of hoping you find some value in that one. And then we're going to wrap it up with a combination strategy of what we call pulse and respond, or sometimes we call it broadcast and respond, to hopefully give you something you can walk away with and think about building a strategy around. Now, I warned you that as a recovering CPA, I'm a little stuck on measurement, but I do think it's an important thing to talk about before we jump into the strategies. There's still a large measurement gap in the marketing world in general, and believe it or not, I think even a larger gap in the digital world, where the expectation of marketers' ability to measure something is quite high. This is an excellent chart, I think, that shows you the large gap between expectation, in this case, how important do people think measurement is, versus the actual ability to perform that measurement. Part of our challenge as email marketers is that we want to focus on the metrics that are right in front of our face all day, every day, which are things like opens and clicks. Some of us are lucky to be in businesses where we can directly tie our email activity into the revenue that's being generated. But most of us aren't in that kind of a business, and we have to work really hard to figure out how to close the gap between what our activities are and what value it brings to the organization. And as a recovering CPA or a financial person, I can guarantee you that if you have executives, C-level folks, vice presidents, high-level managers, etc., that are allocating your budgets, I can guarantee you need to start having a different conversation with them that goes beyond things like the tactical metrics of opens and clicks. Because what we have found is that for the most part, organizations live on somewhere in this pendulum of the measurement seesaw, from budget optimization up through opportunity optimization. And I think it's important for you to understand where you live in there so that you can modify your behavior, even modify your presentations to your executives, and make the most out of it. So on the budget optimization side, which by the way is where most companies live, you're allocated a budget, and that's that. You have to work within the budget constraint that you're given. So if you're given $500,000 to work with, $100,000 to work with, $10,000 to work with, you don't have much of an opportunity to move or manage that budget because it's just set in stone, and you have to maximize against that particular stated budget. On the opposite end of that spectrum is opportunity optimization. That means you've convinced your team, the people that control the funds, that when they invest an extra dollar in you, they're going to get an extra return. There's actually very few companies that have the ability to do that. Again, if you're directly an e-commerce company and you're directly connected to your revenue, it's a little bit easier for you. Most don't have that. And part of what I'm hoping you come out of this conversation with today is some thinking and some tools that you can use to go talk to your executives differently. You'll hopefully see in the scoring models that we use here later that will give you some thinking on that and some tools you might be able to use. But in the meantime, let's talk about these specific strategies. If you're not building your database, then you're really missing out on some opportunities. So you absolutely have to continue to build your database. And one of the easiest ways to start doing this is just really starting to look across the entire landscape of ways to capture names. This is just a nice little list that you can look at, but I really encourage you to stretch yourselves and find out where in these lists you have actual opportunities to collect more names. The reality is when you look at the research, most names are collected based on some kind of transaction. So again, if you're an e-commerce model and somebody's purchasing something from you online, you have a great opportunity right there to capture their email address and continue your conversation with them. What we also see, though, is that offline is a great opportunity to also capture names. The world seems to be coming around a little bit to the right blend of both online commerce and offline commerce. There's plenty of opportunities in the offline activities in order to capture email addresses from, especially in store, and that's something that we've been really working hard with clients to recognize better and give them good reasons why a prospect or a customer would want to submit their email address while they're at the store. So use this as just kind of a landscape of things to look at to try to improve your collection of email. And then just a couple quick examples that you can look at that are typically fairly easy to execute on, but oftentimes they are not thought of until the last minute, and therefore they're not really leveraged. So this is just a simple social posting where within the post, we're actually giving people the opportunity to join our email list. One thing I'll note here for you is that we have to get away as marketers from using terms like join our newsletter list. We have to really get in better alignment with what the consumer's expectations are. and make it feel a little bit more special. Now, this is just a simple little example. They don't talk about joining the newsletter list. They talk about joining the club. Now, what would you rather do? Join a newsletter list or join a club? I mean, just the connotation of the word club alone has a much better feel to it. It feels exclusive. It feels like I'm going to get something a little bit more special than by joining a newsletter list. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here as we go along, but it's really important to start thinking about the language that you're using in order to persuade your consumers and prospects to join your email list. Another important one is social logins. This is pretty common nowadays. A lot of people have this, but it's still one of those relatively simple things to get done that can start to amplify your ability to capture even more names by using something as simple as social login. Frankly, sometimes the technology teams within organizations actually get in the way of making this happen for good reason. Privacy is important. There's good reasons why that happens. But there's actually fairly simple ways to get this done today with various integration providers. And this shouldn't be a high-friction thing for you to do. It should be something that you can put on your roadmap and get done in a reasonable amount of time. The other thing to always keep considering, again, these are fairly well-known practices, but they're important to remind us about how things have evolved, is to only capture the information that you need. So many of the marketing automation tools in the marketplace today have this notion of what they call progressive profiling, which allows you to capture as minimal information as you need for that particular moment and then build on it. This is a good example here of me signing up for a white paper. They've asked me a fair amount of information here, but they haven't asked me for everything under the sun either. So in that case, it's not that hard for me to fill out. They've got the social login here in this case. A day or two later, I happened to go back to the site, was looking for more information. In this case, they recognize me. And because they've already captured some information from me, they're using this opportunity to try to capture a little bit more information from me. And these are the kinds of clues that your consumers and prospects will give to you. If you're not providing enough value here, let's say I read the other white paper, I valued it enough, I came back, but maybe I'm not getting enough value from this organization. I might not want to give them all that information, right? And that is a good clue for that company that the company is not providing enough value, and they're going to have to think of additional ways to position their value in front of me in order to get more information from me. And then the huge thing here is make sure you're experimenting your way to success. Now, there's a whole related discipline and topic around optimizing landing pages in order to increase your acquisition. Clearly, as email marketers, we need to have a voice in that optimization because we want to capture more consumers and prospects into our database. This is a great little example. This landing page is actually fairly decent. It's got some good principles in it, some good best practices in it. It's nice and simple. It's not cluttered. But the bottom line is they weren't getting enough activity out of this particular landing page. They wanted to increase that activity. So we started to work on that with them, and we started to change some of the language. We started to change some of the layout. So we moved from the term get agile to talk to an expert. We moved a white paper offer up from the bottom of the page up to the top of the page. We experimented with pop-up forms versus on-page forms. And through that combination of experimentation, we increased conversion rates by 36%. Now that's a pretty strong increase, and that happened in fairly quick order because not only were we testing best practices, but we were thinking about what the prospect wants in this case, not just what we want to tell them. So those are some good ways to keep your acquisition techniques up to date and continue to evolve them, look across that landscape, and start to acquire more prospects and consumers. One moment, please. Excuse me. The next thing to talk about here is really personalization. This is yet another buzzword that's in the marketplace right now that really starts to lose its meaning because everybody's definition of personalization is slightly different. So let's see if we can start to define this a little bit better as we talk through it. I mean, in the simplest terms, let's just treat people like people. Let's try to talk to them like they're real people and align our messaging to them in a way that is meaningful for them. And what this really gets down to is the ability to evolve past this batch and blast mentality that the email marketing community has has kind of had for a length of time. Now, there's lots of talk about moving past this. It's one of those things that's simple to talk about and a little bit harder to do. So let's see if we can, again, help with our evolution here. In case you're not sure what batch and blast is, it's fundamentally when you create a single email and you send it to a large group of contacts with no attention to that individual attributes or their individual behaviors. You fundamentally have just blasted out an email. In fact, we still have a lot of our clients will oftentimes still call this batch and blast, or they'll call it blasting an email, and we're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're not going to really blast an email. We are going to be thoughtful about this email and make sure that it has the right content in it. Because really what you have to think about is it spam when you do a batch and blast? Or not technically. It's not technically spam. But spam is technically not meat either. And how you present yourself to your guests, your customers and prospects, it really does matter. Spam is really whatever a consumer thinks is irrelevant to them is a good way to think about it, not just about the legal terms, but about the way consumers think about your email. And in the end, I think, if we put it in kind of stark terms, it's disrespectful to have this database of people that you can talk to. You've worked hard to maybe know information about them, and to send a one-size-fits-all email out to all of those people, I think it's just disrespectful for us to do that. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary, but oftentimes we just don't put enough thought into it, and we, frankly, as marketers, can get a little bit lazy about that. So why do companies then continue to do this? There's still a large proportion of companies that batch and blast in this particular fashion. Well, it's easy, for one thing. And creating variation in your messaging can actually get fairly expensive if you're not smart about it. If you have to create 7 different images or 7 different content blocks, that can get expensive. If you have a challenging approval process, that can get more challenging for you. So, and then there's also uncertainty about the economic benefits of personalization because it does take that extra effort. Now, having said that, can we actually make it more effective? And I think you'll find that the answer is a resounding yes. And it really starts with this premise of journey mapping. Now, when you look at this slide deck and you go back to the marketing hype charts from Gartner, you'll find elements of journey mapping on the hype charts. Again, this is a popular term in the marketplace, and more people are doing it. And so now the question is, can you really do it well? And I think the answer to that is yes, but you have to really focus on it, and you have to be purposeful about what you're doing. You can't really just throw lipstick at this and then hope that it works. You have to dive in, and you have to really get in the shoes of your consumer and your prospect and understand their journey. And what we're finding to be really successful at this is, good, solid, hardworking work sessions in which you try to get in that customer's shoes and start to understand their journey a heck of a lot better. And not only should you do that as a stakeholder for your own company, you should actually go make sure that you can validate your findings in the actual marketplace and talk to your actual customers and your prospective customers as well to validate that you have found things that they are actually interested in, and you can start to think about aligning your content to that. And so in the end, these things can turn into very focused execution maps that you can start to leverage to build out your marketing programs and campaigns in a very, very purposeful way, which again is moving us away from this batch and blast mentality and helping us to understand where are my prospects in their buying cycle and how do I align to them. Well, one of the ways to do that is to make sure that you set really strong objectives and goals. What we find is objectives tend to be relatively straightforward things. Right? In this example, acquiring more emails. We just got done talking about that. Driving revenue, supporting web engagement. In the end, a lot of times these objectives are very straightforward. The challenge here, the key is to set goals that can then drive your programs and campaigns so you know that you're really aligning to those objectives. So let's continue to break this process down a little bit. We don't want to just create pretty pictures of personas and journey maps and things of that nature. We really have to get into this and understand what are our prospects thinking, feeling, doing, right? And really get in their shoes and start to figure those things out. Think like they think. Talk like they talk. And you will find some amazing insights in doing that exercise that you're going to be able to leverage in your actual marketing material. Make sure you're identifying the impact points on their journeys. Now, if you start talking to your executive teams or you're thinking about journey mapping can be one of those Wild West things. It could be very broad. You can get caught up in it and get out of direction in fairly quick order. Oftentimes, we find it's good to really focus in on what we call the micro journey. Oftentimes, to get started, that's a great place to start. So how do they interface with my website? How do they interface with my email marketing programs? And use those as ways to identify your impact points. Turn those impact points into real campaign strategies. Turn them into strategies that look at the behavior of the consumer, they look at the buying process of your prospects, and they help you drive them through these buying processes with really smart strategies and really smart content ideas. When you do that right, you will have the opportunity to move away from the batch and blast mentality, and you will have campaign messaging that is focused on the consumers where they are in their life cycles. Now, here's a relatively straightforward example for you. The journey for a pregnant mom is fairly clear and fairly well defined in the marketplace. So it gives us the opportunity to be much more personalized for her or for the dad, because we know what to talk about relative to their life cycle. We know, for the most part, when they are in a prenatal stage. We know when they are in a postnatal stage, and we can modify our content, even though it's the same fundamental email templates, it's the same fundamental broadcast that we're doing. We can really tailor our content to those specific life cycles. Another way to think about personalization is in the terms of dynamic content. Again, we've worked hard to start to understand our consumers. We've gathered attributes about them. We might know what kind of profession that they're in. In this example, we are talking about a shoe company, specifically a boot company that sells fundamentally to the construction trade. We could have gone out with just the static content that you see out here on your left, right? Is a boot a boot a boot, right? Now, I'm not in that trade, so to me it is, but that's not what it is for these people. It's an important part of their everyday work life, these boots. So rather than sending out that static content, right, we worked with the data that was there, and we started to develop creative, in this case, hero shots that reflected the boots of that particular segment. Right? And this is the kind of relevance when you see these studies that talk about consumers will engage with companies that are relevant to them. This is what they're talking about. Right? The consumer doesn't think about it that way. They don't know. They don't care that it took a lot of work to have variations of boots being sent out to them. All they know is they feel that they're being paid attention to, that the company is starting to know them. So these little things can make a huge difference. One thing to note, these things don't always make a huge difference in one individual email execution, but they do make a big difference over the life cycle of dealing with your prospects and consumers and driving overall value for a long period of time. So don't think about these things as just tactical execution elements in your single email campaigns. Think about them and trying to drive value across your consumer landscape. So that's a good build-out of evolving the term of personalization. Now I want to take a quick moment to talk about content. Again, when you look at the hype cycle, you'll see content marketing is actually on the trough of disillusionment, which is, again, a funny term, I think, but it's been talked about so much that I think people are forgetting how to really get closer to it and understand what it really means. Here's what we found. The approach to content is typically upside down for most companies. So this is a really interesting chart that says on the left, what is the actual importance of the elements of direct response? Okay? The list is the leader. The offer or subject line is second most important. Format and copy are third and fourth. But in the same research, the perception of marketers is that the list is the least important, that the offer has almost zero importance, but format and copy have the most importance. So a lot of times we have this completely upside down. So let's just think about this in email marketing terms for a second. What really is the list? Right? The list is our email marketing database, but does that really represent the list? No, the list is the way that we target prospects and consumers inside of that list so that we can align the right offer to them, right? In email terms, the offer it's the subject line, right? So if we're not spending a lot more time working on our subject lines and we're caught up in the working up of the creative and the copy that's deeper inside the email, we probably have it backwards, right? Let's work on our subject lines and really align them to what our prospects and consumers are interested in. And one of the ways to do this is to really start to understand the decision-making science of the brain. So we've got a notion that we call the Persuasion Equation. And what it really does is it pays a lot of respect to the way that the brain makes decisions. So there's a part of your brain that's actually called the reticular activator. You may have heard it in other terms. Sometimes they call it the lizard brain. Sometimes they call it the old brain. But it's really the part of the brain that knows how to govern and manage all of the inputs that you're receiving all of the time, right? And if you've ever noticed, oftentimes if you're on the similar pattern or you drive a similar way to work every day, you'll sometimes notice that you got to work and you don't really remember making the turns and getting and how you actually got to work. You just, boom, you just showed up at work. Similar things happen when you're scanning the internet, when you really don't notice any of the banner ads, except today they jump up all over the place. They jump off the screen at you. They come flying across the screen. It's because they're still trying to get in your head, and they're trying to break you out of your reticular activator out of sleep mode. And in fact, the reticular activator governs that. So sleep mode we call alpha, and active mode we call beta. And our job as marketers is to switch our consumers from alpha mode, which is not paying attention, to beta mode, where they're actively searching for information. So you may have heard, again, if you follow these kinds of trends in the marketplace, that interrupt marketing is dead. We shouldn't be interrupting our prospects and consumers anymore. And I respectfully disagree. We absolutely have to interrupt our prospects and consumers, but there's a key to this. We can't just interrupt them for interruption's sake. I think a lot of you have seen how these banners try to fly in front of your face and they try to interrupt you in almost disruptive ways. What we really have to work on is interrupting our prospects and consumers as a way to engage them. And the way to engage them is to start to let them know that you have valuable information for them that's going to help them solve their problem. Right? Then you continue to educate them on the proper ways to think about buying what you sell, and ultimately you end up giving them low-risk offers to give them the opportunity to continue to engage with you. Right? We can think about that as going back to our acquisition slides, where we need to present offers that are simple, right, and they're low risk. And that's the way we start getting in our consumer and our prospect's head and start to talk to them in terms that are more on a people-to-people basis versus us talking about our products all the time, our products and our benefits. So that was a little bit about how to think about personalization and evolve your email marketing and start being a better content marketer in leveraging something like the Persuasion Equation to help drive that process for you. Now, we're doing all of these emails and we're evolving our email because we perceive that it's adding value. So let's look at a scoring model. It's a new scoring model, but it actually borrows a lot of information from the past. And we're going to just bring that forward and show how we can potentially add value to our email marketing through talking about value. So here's another buzzword term, engagement. Everybody wants engagement. Everybody talks about engagement, but nobody really works at defining what does that mean. And so we're going to look at a scoring model from decades ago that actually is going to deliver on it. So earlier in the conversation, we talked about we've got to stop talking about opens and clicks, and we've got to start talking about how our email marketing programs are adding value. Now, by the way, when I say that, I don't really mean we should stop talking about opens and clicks. Clearly, as email marketers, those are key drivers for us. But in the end, really, the executives, the vice presidents, et cetera, they don't really care about the clicks and the opens because they don't know how to put them in any kind of context. We need to talk to them about value, and then clicks and opens will make perfect sense for them. So let's try to define engagement here a little bit. One of the ways to think about engagement is we'll use an analogy to customers. So how do you know when a customer is still a customer? Because they're not telling you that they're going to stop being a customer. Right? So how can we actually define a customer? Is it reasonable for us to think about a customer as somebody that has purchased from us, and we have an expectation, right? We have an expectation that they will purchase from us in the future. Because if we don't have that expectation that they're going to purchase from us in the future, they're really not a customer anymore, are they? So it seems like that's a reasonable way to think about a customer. So let me give you some contrast here to see if I can help pull you in a little bit closer to this definition. If I asked you to evaluate two customers, one who bought from you 1 month ago, and the second one who bought from you 5 years ago, which one would you say is the more valuable customer to you? Just let that sink in for a moment. Which one would you think is the more valuable customer to you? Now, I bet you have good marketers' intuition, and it's intuitive to say that the customer that bought from you 1 month ago is likely more valuable, right? The expectation is that they will be more valuable to you. And if you have that intuition, then you're exactly right, and we're going to use that intuition to really build out this model. Again, we're borrowing something from the past. Again, I'm dating myself here a little bit when I talk about these things, but it just goes to show you that things really do evolve and they come back around, and they can, when we look to the past, it can oftentimes help us with our future. So the marketing automation and CRM industry actually existed in 1985. Before it was all digitized in the cloud, et cetera, it was simply called database marketing. So let's value our email database by thinking about things in terms of database marketing. So when we talked about your intuition about the customer from 1 month ago being more valuable, that intuition is actually founded very solidly in data. So here's the CPA in me coming out again, wanting to talk about data and measurement. But again, this is an interesting graph that shows us in fairly certain terms that consumers that purchased from us 1 month ago are highly likely to be a return customer compared to those who purchased 5 months ago, or 10 months ago, or 15 or 20, etc. Right? Because that recency of their behavior, in this case a purchase, is highly predictive of their future value to us. So it's all fine and good to talk about academic studies that come from Harvard Business Review and all that fun stuff, but what about if we apply real data to it? So we did this. We went and looked at some of our customer databases, and in this case, here's what we did. We said, give us a population of our consumers who opened an email as of 12/31/2015, and let's look at how we spread those across, going backwards across time. So a certain amount of them had last opened in December, another certain amount had opened last in November, et cetera. And then we compare that to their opening of an email in January of 2016. And that's what that orange line represents. It's very, very clear. This is real data. It's a little bit more noisy, but it's real data that reflects that if you, in this case, your behavior is opening, if you've opened recently, I have a much higher probability of you opening in the future than if you have opened less recently. So the way that they did this back in the 80s is they actually created these various scoring models that would put people into quintiles. So basically it was a simple way to organize your database. You simply order your database from those that are most recent to those that were least recent, divided them into buckets of 5, and you came up with a scoring model. They add frequency in there, which is a measure of how often you do something. So in our email world, that could be how often you've opened, how often you've clicked. And it creates this very easy to understand grid that actually now represents segments of your database. This is a different way to segment than maybe you've seen in the past, and it's a segmentation of recency and frequency. In this case, with a recency of 5, that's the best, and a frequency of 5, that's also the best. That's your highest value of consumers. We just proved to ourselves that if you're more recent, your future value is high. But let's simplify this just a little bit and put things in a simple 2x2 grid, where on the horizontal axis we're looking at those consumers that are less recent to more recent, and on the vertical axis we're looking at those that are less frequent to more frequent. So we'll just keep it in a simple grid here, and we can now assign values to that grid. So again, the upper right-hand quadrant tells us those folks that have both the most current value, they've done something recently and they've done it often. That also predicts that they have the most potential value. We just proved that with both our intuition and with real data. We know that customers that have some high frequency, but they haven't done it for a while, right? Again, those charts just prove to us those folks are starting to fall off and starting to become non-customers. We've got to go save those folks. The folks that have not engaged with us very often, very frequently, but have done it recently, those are the folks we have the opportunity to grow, right? And finally, the less and the less quadrant, you really have to think, do you focus any effort there? Yes, you should do some reactivation. Email is one of the easiest places to do reactivation. You will get some consumers to reactivate. There are good techniques in the marketplace to do that. I get one from, I think it's Petco. I get one from Petco all the time, where they are threatening to not email me anymore because I haven't been active. What do you think that gets me to do? I actually get in there and start to open those emails. First of all, I'm curious, and second of all, it works. And so you'll get some proportion of your email database to reactivate just on reactivation campaigns. So I want to grow this out for you. I told you I want to share with you a way to value this in more financial terms. So these are simply the quantities of consumers that lived in those quadrants based on that real data analysis that I shared for you. So we have a large chunk, 314,000, that are in the growth stage, in the ability to grow stage, and we have a group that are in the loyal stage that is still pretty strong. And right, we ultimately want to grow those numbers in those quadrants to value our database. But in this case, we wanted to put some financial numbers on it. So we wanted to think about things from a lifetime value study. Now, if you're going to do this, you have to really understand what your analytic maturity is. You can do this exercise no matter what level you're at, but you just might have to make more assumptions in order to get there. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. When I was talking about the measurement seesaw earlier, we as marketers, we need to step up, stand on some assumptions, and prove to the executives that we're driving value. And if there's any executives on this phone call, I'll ask you to plug your ears real quick, right? So for the rest of the team on this call, what that means is you've got to sell it to them, right? You've got to convince them that this is true. That means you've got to stand behind it, and you have to convince them that these things have value to them. So this is a real case study where we went through a real exercise of defining lifetime value. And these were the simple terms in which this exercise was defined at. The business objective was to create lifetime value. The marketing objective was engagement, right? Did we just get done talking about engagement? Did we just define engagement as a way to identify when a customer is still a customer, or when an opener of email is still an opener of email, right? That's definition. That's how you start to define engagement. You can make your own definition, don't get me wrong. Okay, just make sure you define it, because then you can map it back up to the business objectives. So in this lifetime value study, they looked at both their introductory products and their ability to upsell products. Long story short here is that they proved that they could drive $153 of incremental value, of incremental lifetime value, because those consumers were in their email marketing programs. Okay, now imagine you're armed with this kind of information, and you're not talking about opens and clicks right now to your executives. You're saying, yeah, my database is worth about, pretty solidly worth about $60 million based on the current value of the high group that I have here and the growth group that I have here at $24 million. That's what my database is worth. That's why we're doing email marketing. I can guarantee you, as a person that's been in finance, that is a conversation that nobody is having with their CFOs right now or their financial executives. Right? You can change that game, and you can have that kind of conversation if you start to think about things in these kinds of terms and you're willing to stretch yourself a little bit in order to make some assumptions that drive actual value. So I'm hoping you can leverage that. Of course, we'd be happy to talk to you guys about that at another time. But it comes back to recency and frequency are just really, really simple measures that you can use in new ways because it reflects behavior, and behavior is the number one predictor of future value, right? So you can segment your database to death, but recency and frequency are probably some of your best friends that you can use. So let's put this together in a couple strategies that make a lot of sense. We've talked about how engagement is lifecycle marketing. We've talked about how to start to draw that out on a map. This is an example, again, from the boot company, where I especially want to focus on the folks in the bottom of the screen here who purchased footwear and opted in. Look at this campaign. This is an amazing campaign. 24 months of emails initiated from that initial time that they bought shoes and they opted in to receive email. 24 months. Can you imagine? Your database is working for you all that 24 months, whether it's snowing, raining, sunshine, doesn't matter, doesn't take a day off. It's always working for you because you were smart about setting up something that is mapped to that prospect's life cycle. And in that set of life cycle, you're aligning to where that consumer is at. In this case, we're asking them for feedback. They just purchased the boot. Now's a great time to get feedback on how we're performing and how we're servicing them. Okay, 18 months later, we're giving them a chance to come in for a free checkup on their boots. Remember, these are not boots like maybe you and I are wearing today. These are boots that are critical for these people's work life. Right? So this is a great offer that aligns very highly to the types of things that they're going to be concerned about 18 months after they've bought boots. When you look at this deck, you can look at that stream, that sequence of emails a little bit closer. Here's the beautiful thing about this. Again, remember, this is set up. It's running. The database is working hard. The open rates on this stay above average all the way out through month 12. Only at month 18 and 24 do they start to fall below average. Right? That's an incredibly hard-working campaign that is leveraging the strategies of, it's certainly leveraging the strategies of personalization. It's certainly leveraging the strategies of behavioral. Okay? Because really, batch and blast isn't a strategy, right? It's really just, I don't know what it is, quite honestly, but it's not a strategy. But we think a good strategy of personalized broadcast and respond is an outstanding strategy. So let's just go through that real quick. See, what we're trying to say is we're not against broadcasting emails. Okay, you could call that batch and blast if you want, but we're not against broadcasting emails. In fact, we think it's an important thing. Okay, but you have to do it very smart. So most people have two really broad areas of content that they can talk about. They can talk about the lifestyle, life cycle, solution information that they have. I mean, you're not in business just to sell products. You're in business to solve problems. So you have a way to talk about those things. And they want to talk about, you have to talk about your products. You should have promotions on occasion. Right? It's perfectly reasonable for you as marketers to talk about your products. Okay? So we should have a strong editorial strategy that is based on broadcasting out that information and be really smart about personalizing that down to the right segmentation levels within our database. We should absolutely do that. But let's pay attention to the behavior zone as well. So as we're broadcasting these things out, what are people doing? Right? Well, the answer is they're behaving. They're either opening and clicking. They might not be doing anything, which is also a behavior that you can track. But let's leverage the fact that we're broadcasting these things and start to cross-communicate with people across these zones. So if you're sending out a broadcast communication about your lifestyle approach, the solutions that you have, and you get somebody to engage with that email, if we just prove that recency is important, do you think that's a great time to follow up with them and maybe start to drive them down into your value equation and down into your product information? I would submit to you that's the best time to do that. Right? But when we talk to people in the marketplace, this is one of those evolutionary things, lives out there in that level 3, level 4 zone of maturity. There's just not enough people doing this. This is a really smart strategy, and we think it's a great one that people should get started with. And the opposite can happen as well, which is you can talk about your products. Most companies don't want to be known as just a product company, right? They want to add value to the people that are buying what they sell. So certainly talk about your products. And if you get behavior off of those product emails, again, a phenomenal opportunity to layer that back up or lever that back up into your broader value proposition, your ability to cross-sell other solutions to your prospects and customers. Again, it's a great opportunity. So the challenge for a lot of marketers is if you're just going to wait for people to behave on your website, you're going to have some challenges. This is a great way to use broadcast, smart editorial, smart personalization, and then leverage that response as a vehicle to drive that relationship a little bit further. Okay. We covered a lot of material here today with measurement as an overlay across all of them. But we talked about evolving your email acquisition, being smart about progressive profiling, being smart about the landscape of ability or ways to actually acquire your consumers and prospects. Secondly, we talked about the notion of personalization and moving away from batch and blast type of emails and getting into a more personalized zone. We do that through smart journey mapping, really understanding where our consumers are at in that process, making sure that we drive that down into actual communication by leveraging things like the Persuasion Equation. The third thing we talked about is really a new way to think about scoring your database so that you can make a value statement to the people that are actually funding your programs, and a new way to do that and put value on your database. And then lastly, we talked about kind of bringing this together in what we call a broadcast and response strategy as a way to really evolve your email marketing programs. And all of that to say, when you think about your overall email, there's a lot of people that think, well, we don't want to email too much. And I'm going to be here to tell you, you're not emailing enough. If you do it smart, I can tell you you're not emailing enough. You can use some of these strategies to help you figure out ways to email more, sometimes in bigger batches, sometimes in much smaller behavioral-oriented batches, but those are some of the things that we talked about. So we do want to leave you with this opportunity as well to grab some research that we have done, a 14-page ebook on ways to be successful and look for the trends in various marketing automation techniques and strategies. You'll find that very helpful for you, again, to help understand what are the barriers to success, where can you look to for strategy and planning resources, what are some of the most useful system features. Again, evolving your email means being smart about understanding the feature function set of the technologies that you're using. And of course, my favorite is how do you continue to measure things. So that would conclude our presentation for today. So while you do that, there is a handful of questions here that I'm scanning through, and I'll give an answer to as I can here. One of the companies is, what would we recommend for a B2B company that works with broker companies who bring the clients to our company? This is a challenging model, but it's one that we actually have some familiarity with. There's a couple things you can do. First of all, you can what we call reach through your broker network and pull the prospects and customers towards your broker network, which of course pulls them closer to you. It's a little bit harder for you to do that in a email marketing strategy because you likely have to use more mass advertising to start to pull them through, but it's not impossible to do either. So that's one way. And the second way is to actually either give your brokers the tools that they need to market to those types of prospects, or do it on their behalf. Frankly, what we have found is that those brokers, some businesses call them dealers, they tend to be relatively unsophisticated around these kinds of digital marketing techniques, and you might be best served by actually doing it on their behalf or hiring an agency to help you do it on their behalf. Here's another question. Since so many folks read their email on their cell phones, is it better to not use templates when sending to people? Or is it better to just send the email without it? The bottom line here on cell phones and mobile is you're right. First of all, you're right. Lots of consumption of email on cell phones. One of the interesting metrics that I didn't put in this particular presentation is that lots of opens on cell phones, not a lot of activity on cell phones. So bottom line is you just need to make sure that you're designing your email to be responsive no matter where it's read, whether it's read on a desktop or whether it's read on a mobile device is what you need to pay attention to. And again, there's really smart techniques on how to do that and make that useful for yourself. Another question that comes in is, what makes a good subject line? So the simple answer to that is a subject line that gets opened is a good subject line. a more broad way to answer that is when we talked about the persuasion equation, what your subject line needs to do is again, get that interrupt, get that person to pay enough attention to actually look at what's inside your email. And then you have to use engage, educate, and offer in order to keep them engaged as they've opened it. One of the things I will tell you is we have an ebook around how to write good headlines, and you'll see there's lots of good techniques in that particular ebook that you could leverage. I think we'll have a way to, I don't know if we have a way to send that out or not, but you have our contact information through this exercise, and we can get you that ebook, and it'd be great to help you understand how to do that. Another question coming in here is, what's the most successful method for list acquisition? This is a tough one. It really depends on what industry that you're in. If I mentioned during the conversation that if you're an e-commerce company, collecting them at the time of transaction is, highly likely your best way. I will tell you, people are less and less inclined to submit their forms, partially because they don't feel like they're getting value back when they do that. Really, what you need to do is you need to go to the spot where your consumers are gathering the most and drive them towards a registration page that can convince them that they should be a part of your email database. One of the techniques that we use when we're looking for volume is something that's called co-registration, where there are content aggregators out there who are frankly going to be better than most companies at gathering eyeballs, and oftentimes they will offer you the ability to put your forms right in front of that consumer as well, and you have to pay for that, and it's kind of pay for play, and then your email has to work really hard to convert that customer into a more engaged part of your database, because your risk there is that they're just signing up for offers and they're not truly interested in what you have to say, so then you have to work a little bit harder in your email onboarding and things of that nature. So we've seen that there's quite a few requests for the presentation, so I believe we'll have a way to share that. I think this last slide that we have here, I think that was the slide. I think our contact information was on one of the first slides, so we'll make sure that people have that contact information. And you can always reach me at my email, which is simply dave.woodbeck. That's dave.woodbeck at 3deepmarketing.com, and that's all spelled out. 3, T-H-R-E-E, deep as in deep water, D-E-E-P, marketing.com. So we've got just about 1 minute here. So I think, are we up on time? No, this has been very enjoyable. I hope people got some value out of it. And again, I would encourage everybody to push yourselves a little bit and climb that evolutionary ladder and increase your maturity in email marketing.